Power does not always corrupt. Sometimes it reveals dot, and when absolute power is handed to a mind, it craves worship instead of responsibility. It doesn't just damage an empire dot, it exposes something far darker about human nature. On the night of December 31st, 192 AD, inside the Imperial Palace of Rome, a woman named Marcia read her own name on a list of executions scheduled for dawn. Her name was first dot by sunrise. Either she would be dead, or the emperor would dot to understand why that moment mattered. You have to understand the man she was about to kill. Most people think they know Emperor Commodus. They've seen the film, the arena, the jealousy, the dramatic villain. But the real Commodus was not theatrical dot. He was quieter, more erratic, more psychologically unstable, and far more dangerous. He was born into privilege that few humans in history have ever experienced. The son of Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, stoic, the last of Rome's 5 good emperors. A ruler who wrote about discipline, self-restraint, virtue, and the responsibility of power. Marcus Aurelius tried to shape his son with philosophy. He brought tutors, military, discipline, wisdom from the greatest minds in Rome. But character cannot be installed like furniture in a palace that either exists or it doesn't. When Commodus was still a child, servants learned something unsettling. He did not respond to frustration the way normal children do. He responded with punishment. One story, preserved by ancient historians like Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta, describes a young Commodus angered by bathwater that wasn't warm enough. He ordered the servant responsible to be thrown into the furnace that heated it. Whether the execution happened exactly as described is debated, but what matters is that those around him believed it could dot, and that belief shaped everything. From a young age, Commodus learned something dangerous. No one would challenge him. No one would restrain him. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, Commodus was 19 dot, and Rome made a decision that would change its trajectory. For nearly a century, emperors had been chosen based on merit, adopted sons, trained for leadership. But Marcus chose blood over capability. He chose his son. The moment Commodus inherited absolute power, the thin barrier between impulse and action vanished. And here is where psychology becomes more important than history. Commodus did not want to govern. He wanted to be adored. He believed, genuinely, that he was Hercules, reborn. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Literally. He had the massive Colossus statue in Rome, reshaped with his own face and the attributes of the mythic hero. He renamed months of the year after himself. He renamed Rome. He renamed the Senate. This wasn't just arrogance. It was identity collapse. When a ruler begins rewriting reality to center himself, it signals something deeper than vanity. It signals insecurity so severe that only myth can contain it. But delusion alone does not destabilize an empire. Performance. This Commodus chose the arena, the Colosseum. Not as spectator, as gladiator. Over 700 times. According to ancient sources, he appeared in staged combats. His opponents were not equals. Some were chained, some were given dull weapons, some were barely armed at all. He fought with real steel against men who were not allowed to win. And every appearance cost the state enormous sums, draining a treasury already under strain. But the financial damage was secondary. The real damage was psychological. He forced senators, men who had commanded legions, to attend every spectacle. They were required to chant rehearsed praises, specific phrases, mandatory. Enthusiasm. Imagine sitting in the front row while your emperor slaughters a defenseless opponent, and knowing that if your applause falters, your name might appear on a list tomorrow. That is not governance. That is coercive worship. It transforms an entire political class into actors in someone else's delusion. But it didn't stop there. At one event, Commodus killed an ostrich and carried its severed head toward the senators, holding it inches from their faces. He said nothing. He simply stared. Waiting. Studying their reactions. Cassius Dio wrote that he had to force himself not to laugh, not because it was funny, but because his body was overwhelmed by the absurdity and terror of the moment. He chewed on a laurel leaf to steady himself, because a wrong expression could mean death. That detail matters. When survival depends on controlling your facial muscles. You are no longer living in a state. You are living in a psychological prison, and the arena was only the public theater. Behind palace walls, the dynamics grew darker. Commodus surrounded himself with hundreds of men and women taken from across Roman society. Senators' wives, young men. Commoners. Inside the palace, status vanished. All distinctions dissolved. There was only proximity to the emperor and vulnerability. Ancient historians describe rituals of humiliation, nobles stripped of dignity, officials forced into degrading performances. Not because it benefited the state, but because humiliation was proof of control. And this is a pattern we see repeatedly in unstable authority figures. They do not just demand obedience, they demand degradation, because obedience can be strategic. Humiliation is personal. It reassures the insecure mind that everyone else is smaller. Commodus also displayed fascination with blood, reportedly performing crude medical procedures on members of his household. Historians like Lampridius record that he cut into living bodies under the guise of practicing medicine. Whether exaggerated or not, what matters is how he was remembered, as a ruler who blurred the line between entertainment and cruelty, between governance and spectacle. Then came paranoia. In 182 AD, his sister Lucilla became involved in a failed assassination attempt. The assassin struck too loudly. The plot failed, and something shifted permanently in Commodus. From that moment, suspicion intensified. Lucilla was exiled and later executed. Other relatives followed. Senators were dragged from homes at night. Families erased. Entire lineages extinguished. When leaders begin eliminating even family members, it reveals something critical. They no longer fear enemies. They fear vulnerability. And vulnerability often hides closest to home. The executions multiplied. People were killed for resemblance to fugitives, for whispered rumors. For proximity to someone who had already fallen. Fear became ambient. Constant. Invisible, but everywhere. And that is the most destabilizing force in any society. Not violence. Uncertainty. When no one knows what will trigger punishment, everyone becomes silent. 12 years of this. 12 years of staged heroism, coerced praise, humiliation rituals, purges, and escalating delusion. Now return to that night, December 31st. Marcia finds the tablet listing executions. Her name is first. Also listed, Letus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, Eclectus, a chamberlain. People who had survived years beside Commodus. They understood something instantly. There would be no appeal. No negotiation. If the list reached the executioners, they would be dead by morning. Marcia knew the emperor's habits. After bathing, he always drank wine. Ritual creates predictability. Predictability creates opportunity. She poured the cup as she had for years, but this time she added poison. When he drank, his body reacted violently. He began to purge. Convulsing. But he did not die. And in that moment, the most terrifying possibility emerged. If he survived the night, retaliation would be catastrophic. Not just for them, for anyone connected to them. They sent for Narcissus, a wrestler who trained the emperor, a man who understood Commodus's strength and his weakness. The palace corridors were cleared, guards reassigned, silence everywhere. Narcissus entered the chamber. The emperor, who believed himself Hercules, lay on the floor. Weakened, struggling, Narcissus wrapped his hands around Commodus' throat. The emperor attempted to resist, but the poison had drained him, within moments. It was over. Commodus died not in the arena, not in divine glory, but on cold marble, in private. 31 years old. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. Statues torn down. His name erased. Rome renamed. But here is the deeper truth. His death did not restore stability. Within months, chaos consumed the empire. The Praetorian Guard auctioned the throne. 5 emperors rose and fell in a single year. When systems rot internally, removing one man does not cure the decay. And Marcia? She did not become a hero. She was executed the following year. Rome moved on. History rarely builds monuments to those who remove tyrants quietly. But what makes Commodus disturbing is not simply his cruelty. It is what his reign reveals. Power without discipline becomes theater. Theater without restraint becomes humiliation. Humiliation without limits becomes violence. And when fear replaces trust, institutions collapse from the inside. Commodus believed he was immortal, that he was divine, that Rome existed to reflect his image. He died like every other man, strangled, powerless. And that is the quiet lesson beneath the spectacle. No matter how loudly someone forces the world to chant their name, the body remains mortal. The mind remains fragile. An unchecked ego will always devour itself. History remembers emperors, but it studies their psychology, because what happened in Rome was not unique to Rome. It is a pattern, one that repeats wherever insecurity meets absolute power. And it begins the same way, every time. With someone who cannot tolerate not being worshipped, and ends the same way, on a floor. Alone. Silent.